On. Hi everyone, it's Diane. Nice to see you all again. And here's what I'm thinking about today, and that is really an introduction to time and priorities and how it is that we not just use our time but invest our time in a leadership context. So, again, thanks for coming today, and let's get started. The thing about time is that it's finite. Despite the best minds, the scientists, the best leaders that you can possibly think of, the one thing that we cannot grow is the amount of time we have. 24 hours in a day, 7 days in a week, 12 months in a year, 365 days in a year. We all only have so much time. And so, actually, because we can't grow it, what becomes even more important, in fact, essential, is figuring out how to invest it and what it is we pay attention to. And really, that's the whole idea behind our discussion today, is how is it that we are accomplishing the things we want to accomplish and using time to our advantage, and really looking at time as a resource to be invested. And also, I think understanding and having some awareness about where it is that we feel like we're not getting to the things we need to get to, and where it is that we potentially are wasting time or things are getting in our way when we talk about investing time. So, couple of questions for you. How well do you use your time? Think about that. How often do you feel that you've accomplished everything you set out in a given day or a given week or a given month? And what's hard for you and what's easy for you when it comes to investing your time? It's kind of funny because I think in our work, um, it's often difficult to know when you're finished. And so that actually becomes a whole nother dynamic when I think about it. I was talking earlier today about building a fence, and which is a project that I'm doing right now. And you know what the great thing about that is? That when you build the fence, you can see the progress you've made. You can see how much more you have to do and when it will be done. And so oftentimes I think in the kind of work we do, which is really a lot about relationships with children, youth, and families, and with relationships with our staff teams and colleagues, that it's really difficult to actually figure out when you're done. And so oftentimes I think in terms of a return on investment and paying attention, that's one of our challenges. It's not quite as tangible as a construction project. So again, that's why I think it's even more important to have some awareness around that. It's not how hard you work. It actually is how smart you work. And working smart means considering time as an investment and as a resource. And I think so oftentimes we don't necessarily do that. We think about money or staffing or people as resources, but we don't necessarily think about time. And I think too, this some encouragement around doing less better, because one of the things that we know is that we often think that we're going to accomplish way more than we are able to do. And so really understanding in terms of return on investment what things we should or can be doing to actually get that investment out the other side. And that usually isn't a whole long laundry list of things to do to keep busy, things to do to keep active. It really is honing down that list and making it into a doable, practical, realistic, and priority driven kind of a list. The Pareto principle is something that we talk about in a variety of situations, and it certainly has a lot to do with time, and that's the 20-80 rule. So 20% of your priorities will give you 80% of your production. So again, that's why it becomes even more important to think about how it is that we're spending our time and our energy to get to that 80% of our production. The thing with time too is if you don't organize it, you'll agonize over it, and that's difficult. That's actually how we get to a place where we feel overwhelmed, or we feel like we're spinning our wheels, we're not able to get to where it is that we want to get to. Every time we sit down, we're distracted or interrupted or whatever it might be. And so organizing it or agonizing it. And then the other thing I like, and this is from John Maxwell, really is about choosing or losing, because you have two choices. You can either choose how to use your time, or you can lose control over how you are using your time. So again, we'll talk about that a little bit more today. When we are in control of our time, and when we have thought about this, again, thanks to John Maxwell's thinking, he talks about things like initiating, about picking up the phone or sending that email, about spending time planning and anticipating problems versus reacting to them or dealing with them, about investing time with people versus spending time with people, and about filling your calendar with priorities, not necessarily with other people's requests. So making sure that you're carving out the time for your priorities. Now, today we're going to talk about the urgent and important matrix, which is something that we've talked about a lot when it comes to priorities and when it comes to figuring out how you're using your time. And this was developed many years ago. It's sometimes called the Eisenhower matrix. Stephen Covey did some work on it. There are plenty of others who have done work on it. Certainly not an original idea of mine. But the urgent and important matrix really has 4 different quadrants and talks about activities in terms of their sense of urgency and their sense of importance. So the first quadrant, if you will, probably be easier if I could show it to you, but you'll have to use your imagination, is those activities that are urgent and important. The second quadrant is those activities that are not urgent but are important. Third quadrant is those activities that are urgent but not important. And the fourth one is not urgent and not important. So again, urgent and important, important but not urgent, urgent but not important, and not urgent and not important. So let's talk first about those activities that are urgent and important. Those are the activities that arise very quickly. They're often crisis situations that have to be dealt with right now because there's a sense of urgency around them. They often have to do with health and safety, supervision of children, making sure that you're dealing with something quickly. And those activities often we don't have control over because they arise, they come up. You're short-staffed, you're out of ratio. You've got something that you have to deal with right now. And if you don't deal with it, the consequence will be quite dire. So those are the things that fall under urgent and important. We want to do as little work as possible there. Absolutely. We want to do everything we can to prevent activities from becoming urgent and important. Where we want to do the bulk of our work is in the important but not urgent quadrant. So important but not urgent is when we're getting ahead of things, when we're investing our time in things that actually prevent us from having to deal with urgent and important activities. So those are everything from policy writing to make sure that you have structures and framework in place so to deal with situations. Those are things like program planning and making sure that you've got your program plans and you know exactly what the activities are, and not only you but your staff team knows. Those are things like staff training, which is absolutely essential in making sure that activities don't get over to urgent and important. There are also activities, report writing, grant submissions, those kinds of things, where if we get ahead of the deadline, we can work on them in a way that's that's important but not urgent. And that actually helps us to avoid the urgent and important quadrant. So as an example, if you have a grant application that's due or a report that's due on Tuesday at 4 o'clock, if you're working on that the previous Tuesday or the previous Wednesday or Thursday, then it's probably not urgent. It's important, but it's not urgent. If you're working on that, again, the deadline is Tuesday at 4 o'clock. If you're starting your work on that on Monday at 4 o'clock, that's probably hopping on over to the urgent and important quadrant. So again, the more proactive, the more preventative we can be in terms of doing the bulk of our work in the important but not urgent quadrant, the more able we are to prevent that sense of urgency. One of the things that we talked about earlier today was about taking care of ourselves and how that same principle applies. So if you're taking care of yourself, if you're taking a break, if you're paying attention to your self-care, then that's important, but it's not urgent. And what we want to do is we want to invest our time there so that it doesn't become an urgent situation. So that principle translates across, whether it's a personal situation or a professional situation. So let's talk about the other three, or the other two quadrants. So we've got urgent and important. We've talked about that. Crisis situations. We've got important but not urgent. Planning, prevention. So then we've got these two sort of interesting categories, which are urgent but not important, and not urgent and not important. And really both of these have to do with interruptions and distractions. So something, again, may seem urgent to somebody else, but is not necessarily urgent to you. And what I would say is that in the quadrant 3, the urgent but not important, those are oftentimes people interrupting. It's urgent to them. They want to know what time snack is, or what are we having for snack today. And what I would ask you to do is to take a look at how it is that you've done your planning in the important but not urgent category and communicated that so that you can minimize or avoid as many interruptions as possible. And again, that becomes important because what you want to be able to do is you want to invest your time in people, no question, but you also want to figure out ways to give people the information they need to have in order to carry on or conduct the activities that are part of their work. So the more time we can spend planning that and communicating that in advance, the less likely we are to be interrupted. So that is all about the urgent but not important. Somebody else has an urgent question, you then have to answer it. It's an interruption. Now, the last category is more about distractions. So those are things that are not urgent and not important. Sometimes we call that busy work. It's kind of the work that we just kind of do because we're too daunted by the stuff that's important on our to-do list. We really don't feel like doing that. So instead we do rewrite lists, or we spend more time on our to-do list than we do perhaps on the tasks that are on there. We chat with people without really having intention about why it is that we're chatting with them or making an investment in them. And again, we check our email every 2 minutes, 5 minutes. We respond to every notification that we get. All of those things are distractions, and it's super easy to become distracted. But the problem with distractions and interruptions is they all take away from that work that we really want to do, which is the important but not urgent work. So that's sort of the cornerstone. That second quadrant is really the cornerstone that helps us, number one, avoid as much as possible urgent and important situations or crisis situations, and also helps us to focus on the work that gives us the greatest return on investment and leave those interruptions and distractions behind. So lots more information on this. We've got lots of resources on it, but it's just really a cool way to think about how it is that you're investing your time. Not managing your time or using your time, but investing your time. And I think for me, that was a bit of a game-changing term, because when I think about investing time, I'm actually thinking about it as a resource and not just sort of getting to the end of the day and wondering what the heck I did all day because I was interrupted and distracted and dealt with 3 situations, but rather that I had some time to focus on that work that is important and will get me to where I want to get to. So that's what I wanted to talk about today. This is all about how it is that we invest our time. It's an introduction. There's plenty of resources out there. Find something that works for you, because it's really important that you figure out what your strengths are and what might work for you, which isn't necessarily what might work for others. So again, thanks for coming today. Nice to see you all, and we'll talk again soon.